Welcome to the debate. Imagine living like your entire life without a single door.
Oh man, no bedrooms to retreat to at the end of a long day?
Exactly. No bedrooms, no passwords locking down your personal devices, literally no physical walls to hide behind when you just, need a moment to yourself.
Right. For 99% of human history, sleeping within arm's reach of 50 other people wasn't just some weekend camping trip. It was your permanent, inescapable reality.
Which is, it's really hard for us to even conceptualize today, right? Because we treat privacy as an engineering problem.
Right, we think of it structurally.
Exactly. You want to be alone, so you draw the blinds, or you lock the deadbolt, or you put on noise-canceling headphones. It feels very binary.
Yeah, it's either on or off.
Right. You are either observed, or you are safely unobserved behind a physical barrier. And that locked door is, frankly, deeply comforting to us. But when you step back into the deep history of human development, way back into the Stone Age, all of that architecture just completely vanishes.
It's gone.
Yeah, we're looking at an ancient landscape with absolutely no separate rooms and no physical partitions. And yet when we dig into the archaeological and anthropological evidence, we find that the hidden lives of ancient humans were every bit as complex, secretive, and guarded as our own.
Which perfectly sets up the core tension we're unpacking today. We are looking at the origins of human behavior and asking a pretty fundamental question.
Is the human desire for privacy an innate biological need?
Right. Is it something deeply wired into our cognitive architecture, right alongside consciousness itself?
Or conversely, is privacy primarily a social construct? Is it just a cultural technology that we developed purely to manage, communal living, power dynamics, and resource distribution?
And we're going to root this entire discussion not in abstract philosophy, but in the actual material record left behind by our ancestors.
Yeah, from early hominids up through the massive, complex civilizations of antiquity.
Exactly. And just to put my cards on the table early, I'll be arguing that privacy is fundamentally an agreed-upon behavioral framework.
A social mechanism.
Yes. Constructed by human societies specifically to navigate group politics, property, and alliances. When you strip it down, privacy is really just a tool we invented to survive living together.
And I'll be taking the opposite side. I'm going to argue that privacy is an inherent cognitive requirement. It is inextricably tied to the very concept of having an individual self.
Okay.
It's not something we invented to manage society. It's a biological baseline that society has been forced to accommodate.
Well, I think the best place to start is to really define what we mean by that baseline, because I know you see it starting incredibly early in our evolutionary tree.
Oh, absolutely, I do. I look at privacy as a fundamental feature of simply being human. It's one that emerges automatically the second consciousness switches on.
How so?
Well, think about how the human mind works. The very moment you develop a concept of self, you instantly create this unavoidable cognitive boundary between my thoughts and your thoughts.
An internal divide.
Right. And the evolutionary evidence points to an incredibly ancient timeline for this. We can look at primatologists studying chimpanzees, our evolutionary relatives from, roughly 6 million years ago.
Yeah.
They observe deliberate deception in the wild.
You're talking about tactical concealment, right?
Exactly. A subordinate chimp will find a stash of food, realize the dominant male is nearby, and actively pretend not to see it.
They play dumb.
Yeah. The chimp will strategically feign total uninterest, wait for the dominant male to leave, and only then circle back to eat.
Right.
That requires a huge, sophisticated leap. The chimp has to realize, I know something that he doesn't know. We didn't invent sneakiness in the modern era. It's a biological inheritance.
Okay, but...
And wait, if we move closer to our own species, looking at Homo sapiens roughly 300,000 years ago, we see the archaeological remains of deliberate burials.
Sure, but how does that relate to privacy?
Because they aren't just disposing of bodies for hygiene. They are positioning them with intense care, incorporating ochre pigment, shell beads, specific grave goods.
Okay.
You simply do not do that unless you view that person as an individual with a distinct inner life, a specific private story. You can't have a concept of the self without having a private self. They come as a biological package deal.
Well, I come at it from a very different angle. What we are so eager to label as a deep, innate need for quote-unquote privacy is actually just a highly sophisticated social tool.
You don't think it's biological?
No, it's not a biological imperative. If you strip privacy down to its absolute bare mechanics, it is simply information or physical space that one person controls and others do not. That's the whole mechanism.
Right.
And in early human history, this control was achieved entirely through cultural agreements, not some deeply ingrained instinct.
But how do you actually separate the cultural agreement from the instinct that drives it?
Because you have to look at how our ancestors actually lived for the vast majority of the Stone Age. We're talking about mobile foraging bands of roughly 20 to 50 people.
Right. Very tight-knit.
Exactly. They're living in constant, inescapable proximity. Every single meal is shared. Every night you are sleeping around a fire within arm's reach of the exact same people.
Yeah, no escape.
In that environment, privacy existed solely because the group mutually constructed what anthropologists call invisible walls.
Unspoken rules.
Right. Entirely unspoken rules about where to look, what to ask, and when to ignore someone. When someone turned away from the campfire and faced the cave wall, you left them alone.
Sure.
But that's not biology at work. That is social negotiation. It's a political framework specifically designed to prevent constant, bloody conflict in an environment where physical separation was literally impossible.
See, I think you're focusing entirely on the outward behavioral adaptations, but I want to look at the internal mechanism driving those adaptations.
Go on.
Let's dig into the gap between what anthropologists call the felt self and the performed self. Across all human cultures, ancient and modern, we see impression management.
Oh, right.
To put it in modern terms, it's like gnawing enthusiastically through a brutal corporate meeting when you're actually excruciatingly bored.
Yeah, we've all been there.
Right? We smile when we are panicked. We project confidence when we are terrified.
Sure, we all manage our public image. It's basic sociology.
But in a Paleolithic band of 50 people, the stakes are completely different. If the group thinks you are weak, frightened, or emotionally unstable, the consequences aren't just social awkwardness.
No, they're severe.
Exactly. You might get fewer resources. You might be exiled. And exile means death. Therefore, managing your emotions was a literal biological survival skill.
Okay, but
Wait, let me finish this thought. The fact that humans evolved the cognitive capacity to maintain a walled-off internal psychological space, one that directly contradicts their external presentation, proves an inherent, deeply ingrained biological need for emotional privacy. It's a sanctuary built into the brain.
I have to push back on that framing, though, because it assigns a very romanticized internal depth to what is honestly just a raw survival tactic.
Romanticized?
Yeah, you're describing impression management, yes, but let's be intellectually honest about what that actually is. Those early deceptions, whether it's the chimp hiding the food or the ancient humans smiling through their panic, are purely outward-facing survival strategies.
I wouldn't say purely outward-facing.
But they are. They are direct reactions to external social pressures. When the ancient human smiles to hide their terror, they aren't protecting a rich, self-reflective private sanctuary.
Then what are they doing?
They are manipulating the perception of the dominant individuals around them to secure their position in the hierarchy. It is entirely utilitarian. It's a social technology deployed to maintain standing.
That feels very reductive.
It's practical. It doesn't prove we need an internal private life. It only proves that deception is a highly effective tool for communal survival.
Wait, I'm not convinced by that line of reasoning at all, because it reduces ancient humans to mere stimulus response machines.
I'm not saying they're machines.
But you're saying it's all just functional. And frankly, the archaeological record completely contradicts that purely utilitarian view. Think of it this way. If privacy is merely a social tool for group survival and managing outward impressions,
Yeah?
why would humans 30,000 years ago crawl into the deepest, pitch-black, narrowest chambers of caves like Lascaux, Altamira, and Chauvet just to paint?
You're talking about the deep cave art.
Exactly. These were not public murals. They weren't painted at the entrance of the cave where the group gathered around the fire and cooked.
No, they were incredibly hard to get to.
Right. Accessing these chambers required torches, deliberate navigation through absolute darkness, an immense physical effort, sometimes crawling on your belly for hundreds of yards to reach spaces where almost no one else would ever see the art.
True.
These paintings of horses, bison, geometric shapes, they served absolutely zero public or social utility. You can't use them to manage your reputation if no one sees them.
Okay, that's a fair point.
It acts as a prehistoric form of journaling, right? Or a deeply personal spiritual release valve. To me, that is physical evidence of an innate personal inner life that they deliberately, laboriously separated from the communal sphere.
That is a fascinating example, and I mean, those caves are undeniably incredible. But I think you're highlighting a few exceptional, perhaps highly ritualistic instances, while completely ignoring the daily reality of Stone Age living conditions.
How so?
Let's go back to that campfire scenario for a second. We have 20 to 50 people sleeping within arm's reach. There are no doors. There is literally no room for a room.
Right.
Privacy in that daily context only existed when the group collectively agreed it did. If an individual walked into the forest and the group chose not to follow, that was a constructed social convention.
Yes, a convention they created.
And breaking that convention was a cultural offense, arguably much more serious than knocking on a locked door today, because the rules lived entirely in the culture.
But let's look at the causality there, though. You're saying the culture invented the boundary.
Yes.
I have to ask, did the culture invent the desire to be alone? Or did the culture merely invent a mechanism to accommodate an unavoidable biological necessity?
I think it's the former.
But think about how we behave on a crowded subway today. We're packed into a metal tube, completely surrounded by strangers. What do?
We stare at our phones.
Exactly. We stare at the floor, we put in headphones, we implicitly agree not to read the screen of the person sitting inches away from us, we construct an invisible wall.
Right.
But we don't do that because society thought it would be a fun game. We invent that cultural workaround because our innate biological need for personal space is screaming at us in an unnatural environment.
Okay, I see the analogy.
Prehistoric humans didn't invent privacy. They invented a cultural workaround for a biological imperative that was being starved by their living conditions.
But look at what they were actually using those workarounds to hide. Take human sexuality, for example.
Okay.
In most animals, baboons for instance, reproduction is basically a public event. They do not excuse themselves. Animals are extremely unself-conscious about it.
Obviously, yeah.
But anthropological evidence from hunter-gatherer societies globally shows that humans deliberately hide sex. They wait until dark, they slip away from the camp, they make discreet arrangements.
Right, they seek privacy.
Why, though? It's not out of some innate biological modesty. They hide it because sex in human societies is profoundly entangled with pair bonding, jealousy, status, and alliance building.
You're saying it's politically dangerous.
It is incredibly dangerous. In a tribe of 50 people, if you anger a rival or trigger a jealous rage, it can splinter the entire group.
Which is catastrophic.
Exactly. It can lead to violence, which ruins the hunting dynamics, which threatens the survival of everyone. The moment a behavior threatens the political stability of the group, it becomes something that needs to be hidden and controlled.
So you see it as purely strategic.
Information about who is sleeping with whom is power. Ancient humans sneaking into the bushes 40,000 years ago were doing it because the social consequences of being seen were immediate and real. They were managing power dynamics, which is the very definition of a social construct.
I mean, it is absolutely true that there are severe social consequences, but that doesn't negate the cognitive boundary that required them to separate themselves in the first place.
How doesn't it?
Because you are suggesting that privacy only exists to manage external risk. But let's look at what happens when human societies actually begin to build permanent structures. Because the way we manifest our innate needs dramatically changes when our tools change.
Oh, I'm so glad you brought up permanent structures. Because if we move forward to the Neolithic Revolution around 10,000 years ago, this is where my argument really crystallizes.
Go ahead.
This is when human beings stop moving, populations become dense, and agriculture begins. Suddenly, we start seeing architecture that mirrors complex social hierarchies, and privacy truly solidifies as a social product.
You're thinking of the early settlements.
Yeah.
Let's visualize a place like Çatalhöyük, a massive settlement in modern-day Turkey dating to about 7,500 BCE.
It's essentially a giant honeycomb of houses, right?
Right, a honeycomb. The houses are packed so tightly together there are literally no streets. And crucially, the houses have no exterior doors on the ground level.
Wow.
To enter a home, you literally have to walk across the roof, open a hatch, and climb down a ladder. Think about how that reworks the social fabric. Every home is completely sealed off.
So you need explicit permission to enter.
Exactly. This creates a fiercely protected domestic space. As societies transitioned to farming, they started accumulating surplus food and wealth. They needed a way to protect it, so they invented the locked room.
Okay, but
And wait, as societies grew even more complex, this social mechanism expanded to protect not just grain, but reputation. By 1750 BCE in Mesopotamia, we find clay tablets recording furious, hidden customer complaints about substandard copper ingots.
the famous Nasser tablets.
Yes, and in ancient Egypt, at a workers' village called Deir el-Medina, we find massive quantities of ostraca. These are essentially limestone flakes used as scrap paper.
Right, they use them to pass notes.
Documenting secret love letters, accusations of theft, private medical problems, the workers were passing notes just to keep their business out of the public eye. This proves that what we call privacy is just a behavioral framework used to protect assets, negotiate grievances outside of public view, and maintain complex political power.
That's a great narrative, honestly. But I have to reject the premise that property and privacy are mere byproducts of civilization, agriculture, and complex architecture.
Why? The structural evidence is right there.
You're looking at Çatalhöyük and Mesopotamia and saying, look, society created walls and clay tablets to protect property. Therefore, society invented privacy. But you're completely ignoring the evidence that the concept of personal property predates agriculture by tens of thousands of years.
How so?
Think about prehistoric identity objects. Archaeologists consistently find items with absolutely no functional survival use. We're talking perforated shells, unusually colored stones, carefully carved pieces of ochre with geometric patterns.
Okay, jewelry, essentially.
Right. And we know hunter-gatherers carried these specific objects for hundreds of miles. These were not tools for hunting or scraping hides. They were objects that established a profound cognitive concept of mine.
Mine.
Yes. The individual was saying, this belongs to me as a distinct individual, not to the collective group.
Wait, but claiming an object as mine is inherently a social declaration.
How is it social?
It's a boundary you are demanding the rest of the group respect. It still requires the other 49 people in the band to agree that it's yours.
Yes, but the implication of mine is what matters for this debate. Let's walk through the logic. You cannot have the concept of personal belongings without immediately introducing the inevitable possibility of theft.
True.
You cannot have mine without the risk of someone else disagreeing. And the very moment you introduce the potential for theft into a prehistoric society, you introduce the absolute necessity for hiding places. You have to develop concealment strategies for your valuables. So the complex architecture at Çatalhöyük, those roof hatches and windowless walls, they didn't create the private sphere.
You think it just scaled up?
Exactly. It merely built physical walls around an innate concept of individual ownership and personal boundary that humans had already possessed for millennia. The architecture just caught up to the biology.
That is an incredibly elegant way to frame it. But I think it glosses over the mechanics of how that mine is enforced.
What do you mean?
A carved piece of ochre only remains yours if the social fabric supports the concept of individual possession in the first place. The hiding place only works if there's a cultural understanding of a boundary.
Well, sure.
Whether it's a Mesopotamian merchant furious about copper ingots, an Egyptian craftsman passing a covert note about a labor dispute, or a hunter-gatherer hiding a pretty shell, the fundamental action is the exact same.
Which is what?
They are managing information. They are concealing things from some people while selectively revealing them to others. That is structural, that is strategic. It requires a sophisticated understanding of network dynamics, alliances, and reputation management.
But
to call that biology is to drastically underestimate the brilliance of early human social engineering. Privacy was the ultimate social agreement.
But I'd argue that agreement is only necessary because of the irreducible tension between the individual and the group. And that tension is rooted entirely in consciousness.
Okay, let's look at the big picture here.
Yeah, if we pull all this together from my side of the table today, my stance is that privacy is not a modern luxury, it's not a cultural trend, and it's not merely a structural invention born out of agriculture or property laws.
Right.
It is a fundamental, inherent feature of human consciousness. The evidence traces a very clear line across the timeline of human development. We see it in the deliberate burials 300,000 years ago that recognized a distinct, private inner life. We see it in the prehistoric identity objects that establish the concept of the individual self extending into the material world. We see it in the profound non-utilitarian isolation sought by the painters deep within the pitch-black caves of Chauvet.
The cave art, yeah.
And we see it in the biological survival mechanism of emotional impression management. The enduring gap between the felt self and the performed self demonstrates that privacy is deeply embedded in our cognitive biology. We are wired to need a space, whether physical or mental, that is solely ours.
And if we look at the exact same timeline from my perspective, the evidence shows that privacy is and has always been the ultimate social agreement.
Right.
It is a behavioral technology. Whether we are talking about prehistoric hunter-gatherers turning a blind eye to a pier facing the cave wall, or individuals using the cover of darkness to navigate the intense, dangerous politics of pair bonding.
Sure.
Or a Neolithic villager restricting access through a roof hatch at Çatalhöyük, right down to those Mesopotamian merchants hiding their business grievances on clay tablets. Privacy has constantly evolved as a constructed behavioral framework.
A tool.
Exactly. It is the tool we invented to successfully navigate the immense complexities, the rivalries, and the power dynamics of living together in human society. It doesn't exist in a vacuum inside the brain. It only exists in relation to the community you are trying to manage.
I think where we absolutely find a point of convergence today is in recognizing the sheer antiquity of this human behavior.
Oh, definitely.
Regardless of whether it stems from a biological imperative baked into our brain chemistry or a highly sophisticated social contract we invented to survive living with each other, the gap between the self that faces the world and the self that exists only in the dark is undeniably one of the oldest human experiences.
It really is.
It is thoroughly and honestly movingly documented in the archaeological record.
I completely agree with that. It's fascinating to realize that an ancient Egyptian worker passing a folded limestone note to hide a relationship dispute was engaging in the exact same fundamental behavior as someone today clearing their browser history.
That's a hilarious comparison, but it's so true.
Right? The medium completely changes. The stakes might shift from survival to just avoiding embarrassment, but the structural reality of maintaining an inner life separate from the public gaze has been a constant companion to the human experience. The material record shows us that navigating that boundary is an ancient, ancient puzzle.
It truly is. And it suggests there are even more layers to explore in the anthropological material regarding how our ancestors navigated their hidden lives.
Absolutely.
Which brings us right back to where we started. When you look at your own modern life, your locked front door, your passwords, that carefully disguised folder on your desktop with the very innocent-sounding name, you have to ask yourself, are you simply following a cultural rule invented thousands of years ago to keep the peace? Or are you answering a biological call as old as consciousness itself? Is your privacy a product of your culture or an unavoidable requirement of your humanity? We will leave that for you to decide.